available later on. So, welcome to another session of the AUS training series where all topics tie back to the key tasks identified in the AUS position description, or PD. It's a marvelous document. It says what we have to know how to do as AUSs, and this class series focuses on the skills and topics that speak directly to what the PD says. And the reason we do that is if we can get the fundamentals covered of the key tasks and knowledge bases the AUS job series has to have, we'll do great things and add the strategic value we were designed to add to our organizations, whether that's one facility, whether that's a VISN, whether it's a consortium. We have a distinct flavor of value to add to the VA's work processes, and we can be a force multiplier for every other department that we serve. And in this class, we'll look at a very contentious and critical aspect of contracting, and that is the sole source justification. I am Stephen Clements, and I'll be your guide through this topic. I spent several years in VA contracting, switched sides to the good life of being an AUS, and earned the highest certification in contracting, the FACSI Level 3. My lovely assistant and fellow Wisnik AUS, Martin Wallace, who has also earned his FACSI Level 1, will be monitoring the chat and helping out because I might ask you some questions along the way, and he will be happy to help with your general questions. If you have a question specifically for me, please let me know at the end of the class. And as mentioned earlier, this class will be recorded, and the slides and the recording will be made available a little later today. So let's kick things off by asking the question, what is a sole source justification? Please put your answers in the chat. It's not a sole source justification. It's not I didn't misspell it. It's not SOUL source justification. That would be very mystical. What is a sole source justification? Martin, what do we think? We got
John
any ideas?
McClintock jumps in there with a justification for limiting competition.
Mm.
Jonathan Williams, any reason to restrict competition under FAR Part 6.203? Jeanette Dyrek, a way for the doctor to get what they want.
Ooh, some inside baseball. Yeah.
Brian Kahn, reason to use single vendor for a product service. Carla Copeland said to justify one vendor.
That sounds pretty good. Looks like we got some pretty good ideas going on here. So we're going to dive deeper into all this over the course of this class. And this class, the intended audience for it is the AUS job series. Although all are welcome, we get COs, we get inventory managers, we get end users, technicians of whatever variety. You're all welcome, and this will be useful information if you ever need a contract. And our task and purpose include to familiarize the AUS with sole source justifications, which will be referred to as SSJs very often in this class. Our purpose in doing so is to ensure the AUS is properly equipped to educate our customers on when and how to sole source. And our desired outcome is that attendees will learn how to correctly justify, document, and meet customer sole source needs. And we'll meet that task and purpose by looking at topics such as what's the AUS role? What are these things? What are sole source justifications? Which justifications work? Which can't work? How do we write them? And we'll work an example together. We'll wrap up by summarizing what we discussed, and I'll point you to an opportunity for further study on the task. So, next question for you. What is the AUS's role regarding SSJs? Please drop your answer in the chat. As AUSs, why are we justifying anything? We advise and assist. Why are we needing to work with this? And isn't that the CO's job, your contracting officer? Don't you just write some, half-baked stuff on a napkin, scan it in and send it in through force, and then walk away and hide from every email and phone call that your CO sends asking you what is this thing? Hopefully none of you do that. I'm confident none of y'all do that.
So Haley Ritchie said, help end users like me. Jonathan Williams said the spectrum ranges from drafting it to giving advice to the customer. Jeanette Dyrick says justify why the best choice product, best for patient care. Kim Plummer jumps in there with I'm not the end user as the end user with identifying what their specific need is. Assist.
Okay.
Oh, assist. Okay. Got
Okay,
it.
sounds good. We got a variety of answers going on. Appreciate all those. And I checked the AUSPD to see what it had to say since this is the AUSPD class series. And here are key lines that I found. I'm not going to read every one of them, just like I'm not going to read most of the text that are on each slide. I'll speak to it. But everything you see highlighted speaks to this topic. The AUS job is to be the contract advisor on all aspects of procurement for our facilities. We have to be able to independently write sole source justification. So we have to be able to do that ourselves and help our customers to do the same because we know how they work. We know how they're used and how to negotiate them even. As we've seen in other classes, the AUS is charged with being the subject matter expert in the entire acquisition process. Sole sourcing and justifying doing so is repeatedly called out by name in our PD. So this is definitely a topic we have to be experts on. And why do we have that role? Well, back in 2008 or before 2008, contracting officers were typically on site with our facilities and could act as advisors and experts for our customers. They were right there. They could lead our customers through the justification process because they were in the same facilities and directly worked with these people every day. In 2008, however, the great separation happened and contracting was moved out. They were given their own office spaces, often separate from the facilities, and they were taken out of our chain of command and given their own. They lost firsthand involvement with our program offices and direct visibility on their needs. And in the case of out of sight, out of mind, it's easier to not interact with someone every day when you don't see them every day. Like these Teams meetings, they make communication very easy, but you have to have the thought first, I need to talk to this person, and then you got to hit some buttons, and every additional step increases opportunity cost. Well, so their ability, CO's ability to be acquisition advisors for the facilities diminished, and VA suffered for the brain drain. So in 2016, we were created to fill the gap. The AUS position was created to advise our customers on this and other topics. And as our facilities resident contracting experts, it is our duty to use our expertise to help our customers fulfill their duties and get what they need from contracting. And we've mentioned roles. So let's expand on who has which role regarding sole source justifications. Although contracting has a very important role when it comes to SSJs, COs are not supposed to write them. Since it is the customer who defines the requirement and writes the requirement package, it is the customer who has to write the SSJ. It's on the customer to justify a sole source. Contracting is no longer at the facility. Your CO doesn't have direct visibility on your needs and doesn't write your requirements. So how could they possibly be expected to justify a sole source for you? The customer reference guide states that it is the customer who is responsible for justifying sole sources and writing SSJs. As our customer's chief advisors, that means we're involved. For our PD and new language in CRG Appendix F that I happen to get to write, we are charged with educating our customers on contracting. We help them make their requirements packages and the documents that go in them, which of course includes making sure the documents are up to standard. We may also be the customer in certain situations. Like me and Marty, we're often, the owner on the facility side of the contracts we write. If a sole source is going to happen, we're either going to coach our customers through writing it, or we, the AUSs, are going to write it ourselves. Now, I said contracting has an important role to play, but then said we have to write them and make the case justifying them. So what exactly does contracting do? Well, in my words, contracting's first job is to try to shoot us down whenever we come up with a sole source requirement and make us compete the requirement whenever possible. It's nothing personal. It's just that the FAR commands the CO to do things like that, to promote competition to the maximum extent possible. We have to prove to contracting that we should sole source a requirement. And contracting may be hard on us and they may beat up our arguments, but they have to do it because it is their signature authority that makes sole source purchasing possible. It's their name that goes on the award document, on the sole source document. And if someone protests, it's the CO that gets protested, not us. If a vendor sues the government over a sole source they don't like, the CO is probably going to get sued right along with them. So they have to make sure that it's something they're willing to go to that length for. Contracting has to approve the SSJ, and they are the ones who have to publicize the justification and defend it to the world. But remember, it's the customer who defines the requirement, and it's contracting who decides how to get it for us. So even if contracting refuses our SSJ, they still have to find a way to meet our requirement. So our COs have important roles to play. Now, there's often going to be more than one CO involved when sole sources come up, not just the CO assigned to your individual contract, because the justification document sometimes goes up the CO's chain of command before it can receive final approval. The IGCE value determines who in contracting has the final say. For lower dollar value contracts, the CO can often approve the justification, but all the others require higher approving authorities. On the slide, I note how many levels above the CO each approver is and at what dollar values they come into play. And for planning purposes, every level above the CO adds at least 1 month to your procurement. Now, remember, this is a separate timeline than any other document that your CO is working for your package to get approval as well. So, and they often stack. So if one document has to go all the way up to your HCA, that's probably 4 months just to get that one. And then you get the SSJ, so that's 4 months to get that one. So plan accordingly. These may be conservative planning numbers because it can go on far longer, and your SSJ may be rewritten several times before it's through. Because even if you and your CO agree that you wrote a beautiful document suitable for framing, if any of these other approvers are involved, they're only going to sign it if it says the things they want and that makes them willing to sign it. So if you're a perfectionist, like I sometimes might be, and the HCA, the head of contracting activity, is telling you to change this and change that before they'll sign it, chances are you got to swallow that pride and get it done. So long as it's still accurate and ethical, the changes that are being made, get it done. And this chain of approvers, I got this from the procurement manual, and I included a link to it in the presenter's notes. So in case you want to read more about that, you can do so. And so I've talked a lot about who does what with sole source justifications, but what are these things? Does the FAR, does the VAR, or any other source give us a definition? The short answer is no. You can check the FAR, VAR, PG, and PM, and at no point will you find a source say explicitly, hey, SSJ equals X, Y, and Z. Or at least I couldn't. And if you can, then hats off to you. Let me see it. But we have sole source justification forms. So what definitions do we have? We have to piece our definition together through context clues. So let's start by defining what a sole source acquisition is. Starting at the top, we see FAR 2 101 tells us what a sole source is. Next, Procurement Guide 802 101 tells us they require special approvals like we just talked about. And FAR 6 302 tells us that special approval has to be a written justification to pursue other than full and open competition. So between our references, we can make a definition that a sole source justification is a written document we make in order to obtain the special approvals needed to sole source an acquisition. On the last slide, we mentioned the term full and open competition. What is that? Please drop your answers in the chat. What is full and open competition? How is it important when it comes to sole sourcing?
Like bullfighting.
Bullfighting.
Okay.
Now, I got to hear this
but
one.
I throw that out there. But
What's your angle?
Anyway, I just saw an image of bullfighting in my head, so I thought I'd throw it out there, because there's a type of competition. But anyway,
Thanks for sharing.
no problem. Jonathan Williams says anyone can bid. William Lalka says open bidding process from many vendors. William Vandenberg says everyone can bid. Jumping down, Jerry Armand says unrestricted bidding.
Okay.
So it's pretty much a consensus that it's unrestricted bidding.
I got you. Well, so what is competition? Well, from the procurement guide, we get this definition: a contract action where two or more responsible sources acting independently can be solicited to satisfy the government's requirement. Do I see Shaq? Did someone throw a Shaq gif in the in the comments? That's funny. Okay, but there's a definition we get from the procurement guide. So for competition, we have to have at least two independent entities. That means they cannot be subsidiaries of the same company or have the same ownership to be considered independent. So that's competition in general, but there are different types of competition the government can do, and the difference comes down to which types of vendors are we going to allow to compete for our contract. For example, full and open competition is when any company of any size and any kind of socioeconomic group can compete for our contract. All responsible sources are permitted to quote, and they can make whatever arrangements among themselves on how to do it and still be considered. Then there's full and open competition after exclusion of sources. Your CO may decide to allow only certain socioeconomic groups of vendors to compete for a contract. And we're going to talk more about the different groups later, but the goal of this type of competition is for small businesses to get first crack at our contracts without being blown out of the water right off the bat by large businesses. And I mentioned responsible sources. It's helpful to know what a responsible source is. A responsible source is a vendor who has adequate resources to compete or complete the acquisition, the ability to comply with the delivery schedule, has no record of unsatisfactory performance, and can comply with all applicable laws and regulations. This is important because the purpose of your market research, and so your ability to justify only one vendor being able to do what you're looking for, depends on finding responsible sources. If you can find multiple vendors responsibly capable of meeting your need, it's almost impossible to justify a sole source. However, if you find a bunch of sketchy vendors that say they can sell you something that they clearly don't have any history of being involved in and don't appear to know what they're talking about, you can pretty safely rule them out. For example, if a vendor is traditionally involved in mowing lawns, but they respond to a source of SOT saying they can sell you high-tech medical equipment and provide maintenance and all that, I personally would not count them as a responsible vendor. Some people might disagree, but that's my thoughts on it. And so why do we care so much about competition? For one, we're required to care, but it also makes good business sense. Back in 1984, Congress made us care when they passed the Competition and Contracting Act, also known as CICA. This law established the requirement for federal agencies to compete our contracts as much as possible. And competition is the default preference for VA contracting. The law is not a bad read, and I encourage you to check it out. And if you ever take any of those Fac C classes or pursue your Fac C through the contracting school that I suggest you take, you will definitely see this again and again because it is a big deal. But even if Congress didn't make us care by law, it's good policy to maximize competition. When a vendor knows they're your only choice, they're not going to try as hard because they don't have to. They know they're going to get your money. And if their service isn't great, they know you're still stuck with them. Anybody with home TV or internet service, you're definitely going to have some experience with what that can be like because some of those vendors don't care what you think. They've got the market cornered, and legally, they might be the only option in town. Now, when they know you have options, and they know that you have options, all those things can change. Vendors will have to compete on price, and they'll have to make sure to deliver, or someone else is going to get that money. And because we have the set asides for socioeconomic small business groups, we can compete among them first to drive contracts their way. Doing so helps diversify our pool of vendors and avoid being stuck with bad service from monopolies. And so, who's responsible for promoting competition? The short answer is everyone involved in the acquisition process. That's the CO, that's the customer, and that's us, the AUS. We all have different ways we can do it. When the customer and the AUS do market research, one of the things we're doing is identifying responsible vendors who we can ask to compete. That's why the market research reports ask so many questions about where you looked and who you found and how did you look into those sources. And when we write the statements of work or your PWS or requirement description, that influences which vendors can compete and which can't. After all, if our write up says that what we absolutely require and will accept, that limits who can sell us what we need. If a vendor doesn't have what we need, they can't compete on a contract to sell it to us. Um, and to help with these things, I refer you back to the AUSPD class we did on defining the requirement for more details on how we can write our requirements to maximize competition, as well as our market research report class. As mentioned, COs are required to promote competition, and they do that by doing their own market research to add to what we gave them. And they also do it by challenging us on what they view to possibly be unduly restrictive requirements in our PWSs, and also by approving or denying our sole source justifications. And while this class is on sole sourcing our contracts and not competing them, we needed that context to properly examine what sole sourcing really is and why it's a big deal. We covered the types of competition we can do, so now we're going to talk about contracts made using methods other than full and open competition. This is where instead of competing our solicitations among multiple vendors, we instead solicit to only one vendor. However, we can't ask contracting to do that without using a legal justification. If somehow we were able to get a sole source done without using one of the legal justifications, our CO has violated the law, and it would be on their head to suffer whatever consequences come from it. Well, we get to sit by and say, well, too bad, so sad. And this is one of the reasons that COs can be very assertive in making sure that all the facts are right, because at the end of the day, it falls on them if something illegal happened in the award process. So there are many FAR and VAR authorities available for us to use to allow our COs to do sole sourcing, and each of them have their own requirements. And we're going to talk about all of them, but there's 4 reasons we cannot use to justify other than full and open competition. FAR 6301C forbids sole sourcing due to a lack of planning on our part and concerns about our money expiring soon. Having current fiscal year funds burning a hole in our pocket and needing to spend it before fiscal takes it away is not a valid justification. And I remind everybody that every year we're required to take classes on fraud, waste, and abuse. And if you just have money sitting around and you want to make sure that you're going to have it next year too in your budget request, so you have to burn it this year, that's kind of waste. That's violating the class that you said you took and understood. Not saying any of y'all did that, but the hypothetical person that would do that. And but going back to the first point, saying we waited too long to make a new contract for something we knew we would need, and we need contracting to slam a new contract into place right now, is not a legal justification. However, having a pipe burst and flood your hospital is a good reason, because we didn't know that was going to happen when it happened. And not from the FAR, but important supplemental guidance to it are 2 other forbidden justifications. Both can effectively be described using the terms because I wanna. And they're usually worded in one of 2 ways. The first is the vendor already knows our equipment. It would cause irreparable harm to us and our veterans and direct patient care to be delayed for even a second having a competent contractor to meet the need, and no other vendor will do. Well, in the cases of that, I've seen that it hasn't even been true. The customer, it has not been a defensible um, line, and it probably won't fly with contracting either. And there's almost always time for a different vendor to learn our equipment, and a new vendor may in fact do a better job. I've seen that happen before myself. At the second is, well, we really like them. We just have to have this vendor. This excuse might focus on the vendor's customer service being awesome, or it might be that our nurses learned the button configuration on this one brand of bed and can't possibly be expected to learn the button configurations to do the exact same things on another manufacturer's patient beds. Our nurses, they just work too hard and can't possibly be taught anything else. Their brains are going to explode if we ask them to do it. That's also not a legal reason to pursue other than full and open competition. None of these four is a legitimate reason to sole source. So, to save contracting the grief they'll inevitably get when they tell our customers those reasons won't fly, we should have that talk ahead of time and explain to our customers which reasons we can use, which we can't, and what options we have for going forward, because we always have options. The FAR is a very supportive body of regulations that give us all kinds of powers. Well, gives our CEOs all kinds of powers, but we were the ones giving them the information and the ideas to do all kinds of stuff. So don't be afraid to step into the power it gives us. And having covered the reasons we can't sole source, let's cover the reasons we can. As mentioned, we can only use legal reasons, and the FAR and VAR do provide them. FAR Part 6 is all about competition, set-asides, and sole sourcing, so I suggest you read the whole thing. FAR 6302 gives us the foundation upon which all sole source justifications must be built. This subpart provides justifications we can use, and it provides the legal basis for the justifications found elsewhere in the FAR and VAR. It provides 7 justifications and the details on when and how you can use each. Those you see listed in purple text, they're going to get their own slides with more details, since those are the ones we're most likely to use. But we're going to give a little detail on the ones in black, since we're not going to be looking at them again in this class. The list of justifications include only one responsible source and no other source can do, unusual and compelling urgency or emergency circumstances, industrial immobilization, and the rest of that line. That one is used for national scope contracts to meet an emergency or to mobilize an industry for a specific goal. It can also be used for critical efforts provided by an educational, nonprofit, or federally funded research center. There is one non-national reason this one can be used, and that is to acquire services related to legal disputes. So perhaps that could be useful to you to look into. However, it's hard to imagine when most of us would use this one, since most of those reasons only cover I skipped ahead in my notes. Pardon me, as I was. And so we've got. Mm, Okay, so then we got international agreement. So that one is for sole sourcing when either we're operating in a foreign country or when we're making contracts with a foreign government. So that one would be, probably not the most likely one we would be using. However, if you happen to be in, say, the VA facilities in the Philippines, maybe you would be using it. I'm not sure, but if any of y'all have experience doing that, please let me know. I'd be fascinated to hear more about it. And the justification authorized or required by statute. That's when we have specific laws or regulations authorizing sole sourcing. And this is going to show up in several more slides because a lot's been built onto it. Now, national security, that one is exactly what it says when a contract is absolutely essential for the security requirements of our nation. The presence of classified information in a requirement does not itself justify using this, because there are vendors out there capable of having security clearances to do what they got to do. And even so, the authority still requires COs to compete the requirement as much as possible. It specifically says that. Public interest, that's one we don't get to use since none of us are the VA secretary. Only heads of agencies can use this authority to decide full and open competition is not in the public interest for a given requirement. And even if they choose to do it, they still have to make a written justification to do so. So now we'll dig further into the three FAR Part 6 authorities we are most likely to use, starting with only one responsible source and nothing else will do. I see that one a lot. Legitimate reasons. There's all kinds of reasons to use this one, such as unique items available from only one supplier. A couple examples to go with that. When a vendor sends us an unsolicited research proposal that meets certain criteria defined in the FAR, that's one example. Supplies are only available from the original source for a follow-on contract for developing an item or making a major system, neither of which does VA usually do. We usually engage in non-developmental commercial items, and major systems are like battleships and things like that. Even then, certain conditions have to apply. A product or service is truly required, has unique capabilities, and is proprietary to only one supplier. That does happen. An example we can use to compare and contrast when this might cut muster and when it wouldn't. We could take a look at laboratory testing kits and the analyzers that use those testing kits. So if your facility already has a lab test kit analyzer that only works with the test kits made by the analyzer manufacturer, you could justify a sole source contract for the test kits. However, you would not be able to justify sole sourcing the analyzers because VA does not have a standard analyzer we're required to use, and there are other kinds of test kit analyzers out there. I know this example very well because I got shouted down by my COs for trying to do it. Closely related to that example is the issue of brand names and trying to sole source on account of that. Brand names are harder to justify than unique items because you really have to do your homework, proving that no other brand will do what you require. If you need brand name items as only part of the requirement, you're still going to need to write a justification for that part. The FAR does give us a hand, though, because if we're truly after the capability of the brand name item and not just because we like the way the logo looks, if we write into the solicitation that we will accept the brand name item or an item with equal capability to the brand name item, we don't even need a justification. We can just go right on ahead. Don't have to get this separate approval. If only one vendor owns the intellectual property rights to the item we want to buy, that works. If only one vendor controls access to a raw material resource we want, that's a defensible reason. And in both cases, we'll need to prove nobody else has what we want, something that can do the same function and that only one vendor is able to legally sell it to us. If you want a piece of software that is proprietary to one vendor and no other software can do what it does, but the vendor authorizes third-party resellers, our first option should be to look at competing our need among those resellers. Only one responsible source can also be used when it comes to utilities. If utility service is only provided by one vendor in an area, we're stuck. And the FAR knows that, and it helps us out. If our requirement involves building or repairing something with a component only available from one local utility, we would write an SSJ for that one part. However, even in areas of the country where you might have competing utility companies, if you're already receiving regular service from one of those companies, you could justify a sole source to that company as a logical follow-on for related work. Because if you have an incumbent vendor and try to get a different vendor to service the utility equipment the incumbent is already responsible for, you might get into legal trouble, avoid warranties, or create problems. So, the FAR gives you some leeway there. And finally, if the VA secretary determines that all VAs will use only one kind of item to meet a need and only one vendor supplies that item, that's an acceptable justification too. I haven't personally seen that one happen, but it is an authority the head of an agency has, and if y'all have any examples, please let me know. Now, moving on to the next common reason we write SSJs, we'll look at unusual and compelling urgency. This would be our emergency buys. Again, lack of planning and needing to burn through our budget are not acceptable justifications to use this. When time is of the essence and we have to get a contract in place, or else suffer harm to the government, to the program office, or to a veteran, that's when we can use this. For example, if we had a contractor giving regular service for maintaining our hospital boiler systems, which are crucial for operating our facilities, and that contractor sent us an email saying they're out of business and they close their doors today, that could justify an emergency contract. Now, if the same scenario rolled out for an annual inspection service when we just finished our inspection for the year, that would be harder to justify because we would have time to compete a new contract. And we can only use this authority when we can demonstrate a clear harm that will come from not doing so. And even if we get the emergency approved for quick action by contracting, we may still have to compete the contract as much as possible. One time when I was in contracting, it was near the end of the fiscal year. And yes, I'm about to tell you some things that happened that in theory shouldn't have happened, but I understand people got bosses. Bosses sometimes exert undue influence. These things happen. And I'd been given a package with nowhere near enough time to properly compete it. My leadership told me to make it happen that fiscal year, get it done. Well, the only way I could get it done was using the fast track capabilities of a sole source justification, or so I thought. My leadership agreed with my plan. I sent the SSJ through, but one of the reviewers told me no. They told me I still had to compete it, but they recognized facts were facts and they let me cut the solicitation time down to 1 week. So that's what I did. And so there was still competition there. Even if it was truncated, it's still better than sole sourcing. And so when sole sourcing with this authority, remember the resulting contract cannot be for more than 1 year or just long enough to meet the immediate requirement, whichever one's shorter. And we can also sole source when specific laws say we can. FAR Part 6 has these authorities listed, and this authority allows other parts of the FAR and VAR to provide more. To be clear, these are not authorities we can argue our way into. We can't bend, we can't squint and make it happen. We can only use them if our proposed sole source meets the exact terms of the authority. If you remember our class of market research reports, there are several item sources we have to use before trying to use any other source, such as Unicore, Ability One, Government Printing Office, or Printing and Binding, GPO. The authority to require us to do that comes from FAR Part 6. Also, when a source is specifically required to be used by statute, it's a violation of the law to use another source. And so these top three on the slide are required sources for certain items, but the bottom four are optional authorities we can use if we need to. Each covers a different type of small business socioeconomic category. And here we have language from FAR Part 19 that goes into the specifics of what those four are and how to use them. 8A, pardon me, 8A small businesses are SBs that SBA has accepted into a type of development program led by SBA. The FAR gives us authority to sole source with 8As up to an incredible amount of money. As you can see on the slide, that $25 million limit, that's multiple times higher than any other small business sole source authority we have. And that $25 million limit can be raised too. So you could, in theory, sole source as much money as you have to an 8A. Now, one thing to note about this is that with this authority is the contract that you make isn't actually with the 8A, it's with the SBA. And SBA handles the contracting side of the deal for the 8A, and the 8A does the work. And every other SB authority we have, the contracts directly with the small business. So that's interesting. The other SB types you see, we have two dollar ceilings listed, one for contracts with manufacturing NAICS codes and the other for all other NAICS codes. The authority for EDWSB and WSB sole sourcing has a restriction the others do not, and that this can only be used for contracts with NAICS codes where the SBA has determined that woman-owned small businesses are underrepresented. The other three SB types do not have that caveat. So as long as the person you're buying from is an 8A, a hub zone, or an SDVSB, you can use the authority. I've included a link in the slide where you can find the list of NAICS WSBs can use. And I'd encourage you to go check that out. Another thing you'll see is that for 3 of these, the SBA can appeal. What does that mean? Well, in each of these 3 sole source authorities, there's a line stating that the SBA has the right to appeal the contracting officer's decision not to make a sole source award to this type of small business. And that means the SBA could protest our CO not using one of these authorities and try to force the CO to sole source instead of doing something else. If you read FAR Part 19, and you absolutely should, you'll see that the SBA has the right to appeal all kinds of things and get in our business if they so choose. Now, I've never seen them do that personally, but it's something to note. It is a risk you should account for in your acquisition planning. So those are the sole source authorities FAR Part 19 gives us. And the VAR also gives us a number of authorities to work with. This slide shows how it builds onto the authorized by statute authority with these justifications. You'll notice that these heavily focus on securing medical services and other things you need to run a hospital. And some of these are very detailed as to what they apply to. So I definitely suggest you read each of them because they may be a big help to your customers. Uh, I'll point out that the parking and laundry bullet points, those specifically require the VA secretary or their designee to use. So those might be tall orders to tackle, but they do exist. And just as FAR Part 19 gave us sole source authorities for small businesses, so too does VAR Part 819. It gives us 2 authorities, one for SDVOSBs and one for VOSBs. You may remember that the FAR did not give us a sole source authority for VOSBs. It just gave us one for SDVOSBs. And I'm going to point out that the VAR SDVOSB authority is different than the one the FAR gave us. The VAR puts a price ceiling at $5 million regardless of the NAICS code used. And also, the CO does not need to even look for 2 or more SDVOSBs that can do what you're looking for in order to use this authority. They can just do it. Before using most of the FAR authorities, we have to try to compete as much as possible, but these 2 authorities do not require seeking competition at all. Also, SBA cannot appeal the CO's decision to not use this authority. These are powerful tools at our CO's disposal. I've used them before. I might be using one right now, and I'm going to do it again in the future. The VOSB authority works the same, except that we need to see if there's any SDVOSBs we can use first. Other than that, it's the same. And that is the end of the list of sole source authorities we have. If you want a sole source for any reason other than those, you're out of luck. And if anybody knows one I missed, please let me know. I'll be most thankful for the education. But that's all I could find. And knowing the justifications is great and all, but how do we take those authorities and do something with them? The sole source justification document is where we do that. And there are many different versions. There's 2 key considerations to determine which one you're going to use. First, what kind of contract are you trying to make? Is this based on a GSA or FSS contract and you're using FAR Part 8? Heaven help you. Is this a lease? Is it neither one and instead some type of open market buy? Contract type makes a difference. Second, your IGCE value also helps determine which form you use. If your purchase is below the micro purchase threshold, we don't have to worry about any of this because we can simply buy whatever we want below the micro purchase threshold with no need to compete or write SSJs. On this slide and the next, we'll see the different types of forms available, and both of those factors we discussed will come into play. For the most current version of each form, they are available in the procurement guide sections listed. Just go to that part of the PG and you're going to find them. I also hyperlinked each purple line so you can just click and go to that section. And so first we're looking at from PG part 8063, you got open market purchases over simplified acquisition threshold, so over $250,000. You have several different types of lease sole sources. Then FAR part or from FAR Part 8. You've got those GSA and FSS contracts, and it depends on which dollar figure you're working with as to which one you use. And then for forms based on FAR Part 13 and VAR 819, we have these. And all these are going to be beneath the $7.5 million price threshold. And so as a result, these tend to be written on the simpler side. There's not as much to them. They're not as complicated, but you still want to make sure to get them right. And regardless of which form you need to fill out, these are the details you need to know for your write-up. And while some forms have more blocks that dig into these details than others, these are the things you should know before sending a sole source justification to contracting. And that is who's doing it. Who are you buying it for? Who's the agency, and who's the contracting officer you're going to be asking to work it? Describe the contract action being taken. That's not the same thing as the contract description. That's the third bullet point where you describe the item that you're trying to buy and how much you expect it's going to cost. The describing the contract action is where you talk about, I want to do a purchase order. I want to do a standalone C type contract. I want to make a BPA. I want to do a modification. You're telling folks what specific contract type you're working with. You want to identify the sole source authority that justifies you doing the sole source, and you need to spell out why you're justified in using it. You also want to be able to tell people, what did you do to try to promote competition? How did you evaluate whether this should be competitive or not? Now, another piece of information that's always important is determining what if a price is fair and reasonable. And if you're sole sourcing, you should probably have a pretty good idea of what the one person you want to buy this from is going to charge you. And because on the form at some point your CO is going to have to determine something to be fair and reasonable pricing. Well, while you're not the CO, more than likely, you you can go ahead and pre-populate that on the form, explaining how you expect your CO is going to be able to do that. Did you give your CO like a list of prices paid on other contracts for this very same thing? You put that, say that to help bolster the case that yes, we've done our homework, and yes, we're going to be able to determine this to be fair and reasonable because we've got all these facts on our side. And you describe your market research and findings because, again, market research is our duty, and we need to do it all the time. Even if you think you're just going to sole source it, make sure that you've covered your bases. If you have a list of interested vendors, like folks you've spoken with or you have knowledge of that have identified themselves as being interested in this, make a note of that. And also, the forms are generally going to ask, what are steps that could be taken to increase competition in the future? And sometimes there are no steps that can be taken because of specific reasons. Sometimes there are reasons where this could be competed in the future. Just talk about that. And then at the bottom of the form, your CO is going to be certifying that this information is accurate and complete. And that signature is also what opens them up to lawsuits if someone gets mad at them. So make sure that they've got good information all along the way. And now that we know the details, we need to write an SSJ. Let's work an example together. And in order to identify all the information, we're going to need to write the sample one. We're going to define a sample requirement, and we're going to identify the circumstances that justify the sole source. A returning scenario we've got is that we need to buy Tic Tac breath fresheners, cinnamon flavored to be exact. And we've got the sample requirements listed here because AUSs have uniquely bad breath that is inescapable. Even if we're working virtually, somehow the people we're talking to know that we have bad breath. Now, this is a made up reason, but just run with it. So we're going to try to improve our customers' experience by buying us all Tic Tacs to freshen our breath. And we've got specifications that go with it. And one key detail is that the flavor must be cinnamon due to allergy issues that we found. And let's say the products, they have to meet these requirements. The package containing the products must fit in a standard size apparel pocket. They can't be so big, you need a separate bag for them. And if any of these details you're looking at seem unduly restrictive, it may very well be. And in a real world scenario, dig into that. Are they unduly restrictive, or after investigating it, is it right? Do we need to try to sole source with this? Here, don't worry about it too much. We're going to exaggerate a few things to make a clear cut example. And as we all know, nobody ever exaggerates their true needs when writing a sole source. All right. So this is information we're going to need from our IGC in market research. How much do we need? About 110,000 packs. How much do they cost a piece? About $2. So we're looking at 220 grand. Is it a brand name? Yes, Tic Tacs are a brand name. How many vendors are there for this? Well, there's only one for the cinnamon Tic Tacs. Well, who's that? That's the manufacturer, Ferrero, a large business. Because through an act of cosmic injustice, cinnamon flavor was discontinued, and only Ferrero has a stockpile left on hand. We did our market research checks to see if anybody on GSA, any SDVSB, VOSB, other SB, or LBs had any cinnamon Tic Tacs left or made an equal product, but sadly, they did not. And so we did our check for substitutes. They were not available. We did look at these items, the Starlights, the Mentos, and the Altoids, but because of ingredient and calorie requirements, none of them cut muster. Is this going to be an open market buyer? Are we going to be messing with FAR Part 8? It's an open market. Dollar value. Are we above or below the simplified acquisition threshold, which remember is $250,000? We're below the SAT, 220K. Is this a commercial item or is someone going to have to research and develop this? It's commercial, non-developmental. And is there an applicable set aside we could use? No, because we're going to a large business. Now, with those facts in mind, which form would we use? We just went over some key details. Please drop your answer in the chat. Which one of these forms do you recommend that we use? We couldn't find a GSA or FSS contract, so we'd be doing open market. We're above the micro purchase threshold, but we're below the simplified acquisition threshold. We can only find one large business. Who are we doing? Which form are we going for? Martin, what do we think?
So far, 13 MPT set, FQR 13, or FAR Part 13, got it, 13. So a lot of folks are saying FAR Part 13.
Okay. If you said FAR Part 13, micro purchase to SAT, you win. Not only here, but in life. Big time. The world is your oyster. I believe in you, and so should you. So congratulations. You did good. Now, if you didn't guess that one, well, we won't talk about that. Well, with that information in hand, we're going to take a safari and fill out our FAR Part 13 under SAT SSJ. And as we look at the form together, I urge you to not overthink what it's asking for. Just like with every other document that goes into our requirements package, the form will tell you what it wants. We're going to see some red text on the form that's going to explain what the form's asking for, or maybe the language of what it's asking for is so clear that the author of the form didn't put in red text. But either way, just see what the form's asking for and give it that. It's hard to go wrong if you just do that. I find a lot of folks see a bunch of questions, they get intimidated. Just take it one question at a time. You're going to be fine. And be just one moment. I'll switch over to the SSJ. Right. So we're soliciting from a single source under the SAT. The form identifies itself up at the top. And I pulled this off of the procurement guide. This is the most current form of it from February 2022. A thing to note is that without warning, Big VA will update the form versions on the procurement guide. And so you might have filled this one out, sent it in. Months later, Big VA changes usually just the form number. They might not even change anything in the form itself, just the number. And then somebody in the contracting review chain is going to kick it back saying, you need to put this on the updated form when it made no material difference, but they're going to do it anyway. COs don't like it any more than we do, believe me, because they got plenty of more work to do without just copy and pasting everything. But it is something to pay attention to. So every time that you make a new package, make sure you're grabbing the most up-to-date version. And as you can see, this is one page, and this is about the simplest version of a sole source document that we can work with. So up here at the top, you got the name of the document, and it's a good idea to make sure to read it, that you've got the right document. It asks for acquisition plan action ID. So I interpret that, and how I've seen other people interpret that, that is your force number from when you submit the package. So you may not have this before, that number before you send this in, but you will afterwards. So I'm just going to put a dummy number in here, force ac plan ID. All right, so that's what you would put here. And that ties this SSJ to that package and helps make record keeping easier. And that's all that's asking for. Now here, contracting activity. Who's buying it and who are they buying it for? So you see it's got pre-populated Department of Veterans Affairs. Okay, well that's going to stay the same because we're in the VA. What VISN are you in? So if you're in a VISN or a facility, you populate this. Which medical center, if you're at a medical center, it's giving you a prompt to think of that. And it says to fully identify the contracting agency and organizational activity responsible for the proposed contracting action. And if you have a 2237 number, include that. All right. So I've got some answers prepared to drop in here. And mine's going to look a little different because my contracting office is NCO 20. So identify who's going to be doing the work for me and who I'm buying it for, the Western Station Network Consortium. And because this is a one-time buy, I probably got some money. So I have a planning 2237. That's all it's asking for right there. Just who's doing this? Who's it for? All right, brief description of supplies and services required, their intended use, and estimated amount. Now, when they say estimated amount, they mean both the volume of what you're buying and how much it costs. So to sum up what we went over in the requirement description, I recapitulate a bunch of that information saying we require the cinnamon flavored Tic Tacs. Only those will do because of allergy issues. So this is a workplace safety requirement. I go back over the key details describing what it is we're buying, how many, and the estimated total value of it. I'm pretty straightforward. Unique characteristics that limit availability to only one source, with the reason no other supplies or services can be used. So this is where we're describing what's so special about this and why do we think we can get away with just buying this? What's our justification to do so? Now, in this case, the red text is just reminding you that you can go to SDVSBs and VOSBs. However, in this case, we know we can't, so we can cut that out. And instead, I'm going to put in here our justification that cinnamon flavored Tic Tacs are discontinued and only the manufacturer, Ferrero, has them. This being the case, only one responsible source is capable of meeting the requirement. So I put the name of the justification in here. If you want, I would encourage you to also put in the FAR number associated with only one responsible source. You could do that. And description of market research conducted and results or statements why it was not conducted. Now, if you're writing these things and you're leaning on this part of the statement, bad on you. You should always do market research, even if it's a bunch of nothing. And you say, I looked and I looked and I looked and I didn't find what I was looking for. That's better than that. Now, sometimes you don't have to, and there's no way of doing it. Okay, you do what you got to do. But here I recapitulate what we looked at. So we did do market research. We did check our sources. And then down here, this isn't a section to fill out for us. And you can leave the red text in to help remind your CO that they need to do that. And that's all we need to do for the SSJ under the stat easy. Do note that at the bottom, we have only one spot for the CO to sign, because unlike other SSJs, this one's only going to need the CO working the package to approve it. So if the CO can spend 250 grand, they can handle this one on their own. And let's say, oh, also, when you're writing these things, do discuss early on with contracting if they buy this or not, because if you put in a whole bunch of time coming up with a great sole source package and your CO says absolutely not now, not ever, you wasted a bunch of time. And we can't force contracting to sole source anything. So if we can build their buy-in early on, that's great. And I see I'm going a minute over, so let me get through the rest of these slides just real quick. We're almost done. All right, so we made a sample SSJ together, and we're going to summarize some key takeaways. Knowing how to sole source is explicitly one of our jobs, and we should be promoting competition, with sole sourcing being our last resort per the CRG. There's a bunch of sole source authorities, and we have to be able to justify it when we do it, because if we have a well-justified SSJ, it's going to get approved, it's going to fend off protests and get our customers what they want. And for future study, I'd recommend that you take DAU's self-paced online course, Con 0160, Competition and Contracting. It's about 5 hours long, and it'll teach you more about competition, market research, brand name items, and how all that works together. And for my last question to you, my beloved and exceedingly good-looking and above average in every respect audience, did you find that this class helped you learn for the first time, or refresh your knowledge of sole source justifications? What did you find most helpful? What would have made this more helpful? We want to know all that stuff. So you can either drop your answer in the chat or send us an email. We do get those. We do like those. And Martin, what's it look like?
Everybody's saying no. No, I was kidding.
Ah, see, if only I had paused long enough for you to do your song and dance routine, they'd have been 100. They'd have given you hundreds across the board.
Right? Yep. No, everybody's saying, yeah, great class, great refresher. Thank you.
Glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. And so, Martin and I thank you for your time, and we hope you got value out of this class. That is the end of the class material. And if you've got questions or comments for Martin or me, that's great. Be thinking of them, be getting them ready, because I'm going to show you where to get a copy of the slides, as well as the recording and all the other classes we've done. And once I've done that, then it's game on to talk about whatever you want to talk about for as long as you want to talk about it. Because Martin and I, we will be here as long as we have stuff to do with you. And I'm going to drop the link in the chat to the SharePoint site and share my screen. At the Operations Planning and Readiness SharePoint site. This is run by Simona Hunt, excellent person who is at Big VA, who's tasked with help develop education material for the U.S. Job Series, amongst many other job series. And so she's been a dream to work with, along with our assistant, Hope. She's awesome as well. And at the SharePoint site, we've got every class that we've given. And if you click into it, you're going to see a recording, at least one, the PowerPoint slideshow itself, and then possibly some handouts that have supplemental information to go with the class. And when it comes to training your own people, if there's a topic that we've covered and that you like, grab the slideshow, cut it up, do whatever you want to with it. We already did this work, reuse it. You have full permission to do that. We'd love for you to take advantage of the work that we already put into it. Oh, And don't forget also, you can self-register this class in Cornerstone on demand for 1 CLP, so please do so. When it asks you for evidence that you went, what I usually do, or what I always do, is print the email invite. I print it to PDF and then upload that. And I just pull information from the email invite to populate the rest of the boxes, and I get my CLPs, because I get the CLPs for giving the class, and you can get CLPs for taking the class. And if you ever want CLPs for giving the class, just see Martin and I, and we will coach you on how to do that. And that's all I got. What do we have to talk about? Martin, do we have any questions preloaded from the
Nope.
chat? Looked fairly lively in spots.
Yeah, those spots were when you ask questions. But the only real question we had was what was SAT? What does that stand for? But I answered that question.
Good man, good man. That's
Yeah,
why you monitor in the chat.
that's
I
why.
see. I see a common thread amongst these the end of class feedbacks about the way the information was presented. It's helpful. It's in plain language. It's clearly explained. And boy, howdy, does that make a big difference. It makes a big difference for me. I'm glad that you feel that I explained it in that way too, because that's what my goal is to take the academic and hard to read stuff and put it into easily accessible language anybody can use. Um, and so that's makes me feel good that I got a success on that. Glad to hear it.
Where do you go for the most up-to-date forms?
That is the CRG. I'm sorry, the PG, the VHA
PG.
procurement guide, and there are links to it all throughout the slideshow. But I'll also give you the link right here just to help you out. And I see that I crushed Michael Hatton's hopes and dreams. That's helped him find another way to crush his customers' dreams. Well, that's I don't know if I should feel good about that or not. I mean, like crushing things, that's a very like, yes, I am powerful. That's cool. But I guess it depends on what the dreams are being crushed. That's the key.
Yeah. Anytime the customer walks in and says, "I want this, and it has to be this color, and it has to be this style," he's just going to tell them, "Can you justify this by filling out this documentation for me, please? And if not, then we'll get you something comparable."
Well, speaking of non-AUSs being on the call, I see the fabulous branch chief from NCO 22, Anita Modia, was on
Yep.
here, and apparently she was appreciative how I explained something. Probably just guessing from the timestamp explaining how to shoot down your own customers' unreasonable requests. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. Glad to help. Glad to help. Oh, and Jonathan Williams, after speaking up and sharing his video, he realized there's 500 people in the channel. That's a way to read the room there, Jonathan.
You got a question? Are there established pults posted anywhere?
Let's see. Pulse. Yes, there are. And some people might not like this answer, but I generally ignore them. Now, don't you ignore them, but the reason I ignore them is because none of my contracts have money on them. The contracts me and Martin write, they're always indefinite delivery vehicles, so we don't have, the PALT doesn't apply to us the same way. And we also don't have, the same time pressures generally aren't there for the stuff that we make. So I don't have a link to it right offhand. But your local NCO should, and I know that our NCO, NCO 20, does send those out. Now, what site can you go to get that? I may not be the best source for it because I rarely look at it. So that's something to note. If you're an AUS, it depends on what tier of the VA organization you're at. Helps drive, what is it that you do? If you're a facility, if you're at a VISN, you're at a consortium, you've got different activities and different things working on you. I'll take a look though, see if I can find it. Oh, and hey, Martin, would you mind seeing if you can find a link to a PALT? I see another question came in.
Yeah.
Get that. All right, Christopher Salazar. If I have a request that consists of 14 line items and 6 are on contract and 8 are not, would I be required to submit 2 sole source documents with the package? So, okay, by on contract, do you mean like on a required source contract or a previously existing contract? If you want to unmute and explain that one a little bit more, then I'll probably be able to. Okay, FSS.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. So they're actually instruments that were approved through CPRC. So 6 of them are on an FSS contract and 8 are not. So would I need the 2 documents or just the one comprehensive?
And you will in the and it is a given that you would be sole sourcing to that one vendor.
Yeah, so the items, it is an SDVOSB, and they are the sole distributor for this product from this company line.
No, that's good. What's the estimated dollar value?
80 some thousand, 84, 86, somewhere around there.
Oh, okay. Then
It's a lot of instruments.
That'd be pretty easy with that dollar value.
Okay.
But the fact that it's FAR Part 8, see, this one, your CO's got legitimate, or they've got options because they could pursue that FAR Part 8 SSJ, but then they somehow have to include cobble on the open market items, which you can do. FAR Part 8 does allow for that, so long as you identify these are from the contract, these are not from the contract, or if the vendor's willing to go open market, then you can use that VAR 819 SDVSB sole source authority, where you barely have to justify anything. But your CO could also use the FAR Part 13 micropurchase threshold to SAT, which you saw was very simple. There's looks like 3 different ways you could sole source that one because of the different factors and dollar values going into it. So that's really interesting.
But
Did
it
that
really
help
comes
you at
down to what
all?
this,
Sorry.
yeah, kind of. But really it's going to come down to whatever the CO wants. I could go and just submit the one, and if he decides, okay, no, I'd rather want this one, fill out this one, then we'll go ahead and go that route. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And this is something that I do and recently did, was because I was wanting to mod on some items with an SDVUSB to a BPA that we already had. So I talked to the COs about, okay, well, how do you want me to try to justify this? Do you want me to take it from this angle of only one responsible source and justify it that way? Or as they suggested, I'm surprised I didn't think of it, was, well, they're an SDVUSB, and there's no way it's going to be for more than $5 million. Just use the 819, bam, easy,
Done.
half an hour of writing, done. And that's, it was also a logical follow on because everything was related to what we were already doing. So yeah, ask them ahead of time so you don't go ahead and make one form that's beautiful and that you want to put into people's Christmas stockings as gifts, and just to have them say, "Well, I don't want to do it that way." Yeah, ask what flavor they want and then write to that flavor.
Perfect. That works. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for the opportunity to highlight how there's different ways to get to the same goal. But that speaks to what the FAR gives us or encourages us to do, is to don't be afraid, so long as the FAR doesn't say you can't do it and it's legal and ethical, give it a shot. Talk it out. See if it's a good idea. And oh, looks like we got some pulse from Jeanette Dyrick. Thank you very much. Some conversations going on there. Question, Brian. And if you have a question that's related to SSJs, we could talk about that. If it's not related to SSJs, like what we were talking about with the Palt here, go ahead and bring it up. If I know something helpful, I'll be glad to tell you about it. Or there might be somebody else on the call who knows something that could really benefit you. Because we've made a lot of connections on here of, hey, I got this issue. And even if I didn't have the answer, somebody else on this call did. And like there's people who've told me stuff that wound up being helpful, like Marie Kurtenbach. Um, she's done some contract actions I was interested in, but had not. I wanted more information about. She hooked me up. Okay, so not hearing anything, not having a question. Yep. Thank you, Brian. Appreciate you. And thanks for asking the question. You're welcome, Carla. We'll give it 2 minutes. And oh, here we go. How much do you value the acquisition policy flash emails? That is interesting because it is helpful that they're put out to let you know that there's something to look at. In my experience, though, and I'm pretty well acquainted with how to read the FAR and the VAR and all that, is I read them and I wonder what change is actually being made. Like, what am I supposed to be getting out of this? I find they're not the most helpfully written things, but there was a example just yesterday that I found out. Um, I was going back and refreshing the class slide deck for the requirements package because some things have changed, particularly with links to resources. And so I'm updating that slide deck so we can give that in the future. And when I went to check on a class deviation to the VAR, it wasn't there anymore. Glad to hear, Jason. Appreciate it. Like the site wasn't there that I had the link to. So then I was trying to figure out, does this class deviation still apply? So I had to do some digging, and I was able to find that that class deviation that I cited in the slides had been rescinded by an acquisition policy flash. And then I was able to find the number and the link to it and read the acquisition policy flash. So there is helpful stuff in there. And I would definitely pay attention to them. Does that answer your question, Jeanette? Good deal. Good deal. Do you ever read them? What's your opinion of them? Yep. And it's a good reminder that the FAR, VAR, PG, PM, all that, it changes. They change regularly. And you got to make sure to account for that because some of the operating assumptions that you're writing contracts on might not be there anymore. And so you need to recalibrate, change slightly what you're doing, and move on. Yeah. So at the bottom of the page, okay, because I usually read to about the middle, kind of ask my question or ask the question, so why should I care about this? And then nope out. So I need to stick around all the way to the bottom. Okay, thanks for that. It's a good tip. It's a good tip. Kind of like if you're looking for a form and you're in the procurement guide, almost always you can skip the walls of text in the top and the middle, just go straight to the bottom. They almost always have the form you're looking for right there, hyperlinked and in blue. Um, so the good stuff's at the bottom. All right, glad to know it. Anybody else? backdrop going on in Stephen Canna's profile pictures. Beautiful mountains going on there.
Thank you.
Where is that?
Tennessee, up in the
Yeah,
Smoky
that's-
Mountains.
Okay, cool. Cool beans. Originally from Tennessee, West Tennessee, and then most recently, as of Nashville, about 6 years ago, got on out of there. But East Tennessee, it's a beautiful country there.
Just got married there last month, so
Oh, well, congratulations! That's awesome. So that's what the what is that flower on the lapel is about. Glad to hear it. And you look happy about it, so that's even better.
yep, always happy.
Glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. You're welcome, Lisa. Thanks for your participation. Thanks for letting us know or reminding us of how fickle Texas weather can be. All right, Martin, I think we're good. Unless you see unless there was some question I missed somewhere along there that you caught.
I didn't catch anything else.
Good deal. Good deal. All right. Well, it's been a pleasure having y'all. Hope you have a great day, and may the weather be on your side.